Reuters has reported that the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has lost a $60 million hedging case against Deutsche Bank after a US-based arbitrator ruled in favor of the bank. A source familiar with the ruling told Reuters that CPETCO would have to pay the bank $60.3 million plus interest for non-payment of dues. Attorney General Palitha Fernando told Reuters that the ruling was against Sri Lanka and that they are now considering how to respond. 3 foreign banks, namely Standard Chartered, Citigroup and Deutsche Bank, took legal action after CPETCO refused to make hedging payments of more than $460 million. Deutsche had asked the Washington-based International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes to arbitrate.
The 14th session of the United Nations Universal Periodic Review in Geneva noted that the government has already carried out a series of measures which will enable firm and verifiable conclusions to be arrived at on issues involving accountability. The 14th session of the Universal Periodic Review was held in Geneva yesterday.
With regard to matters of accountability and the allegations as to the violations of humanitarian and human rights law, the LLRC in its report clearly states that protection of civilian life was a key factor in the formulation of government policy for carrying out military operations, and the deliberate targeting of civilians formed no part of that strategy. We had pointed out in our national report that the government has already carried out a series of measures which will enable firm and verifiable conclusions to be arrived at on issues involving accountability without any element of conjecture or speculation. If reliable evidence is available in respect of any contravention of the law, the domestic legal process will be set in motion. I must stress that these are Sri Lankans and our government is determined to make a full accounting of our people. Conflict touches the lives of everyone. When armed conflict continues for as long as 30 years, as it did in Sri Lanka, it affects generations of people. It is for this reason that the government has placed such primacy on non-repetition of the mistakes of the past and on genuine reconciliation. No one who lived through the conflict would want their children or their children's children to experience what Sri Lanka collectively experienced in the past 30 years. We are aware that reconciliation is not easy exercise, nor is it one that can be achieved overnight.
We remain concerned by the consolidation of executive power and that former conflict zones remain militarized. Serious human rights violations continue, including disappearances, torture, extrajudicial killings, and threats to freedom of expression. Bearing in mind these concerns, the United States makes the following recommendations. Instructive recommendations of the LLRC, including removal of military from civilian functions, creation of mechanisms to address cases of the missing and detained, and impunity for human rights violations and fulfill legal obligations regarding accountability, especially in light of today's news of the effort to impeach the Chief Justice, strengthen judicial independence by ending government interference with the judicial process, protecting members of the judiciary from attacks, and
we recall the commitments made by Sri Lanka on the implementation of the 13th Amendment and building on it to achieve a meaningful devolution package. We urge expeditious action to take forward the political process for early political settlement. We have noted the announcement on holding provincial council elections in the Northern Province in 2013. We urge that the people of the province be able to exercise their democratic rights guaranteed by the Constitution as early as feasible. We look forward to the implementation of the constructive recommendations of the LLRC report.
China wishes to congratulate and commend Sri Lanka for the major achievements in social and economic development and in national reconciliation. We have taken note that Sri Lanka has published the National Action Plan for Protection and Promotion of Human Rights and is actively engaged in the implementation of the LLRC recommendations and has made positive progress in resettling IDPs and recovering in the economy.
Expedite implementation of reconciliation measures in the North. This would include removing oversight of humanitarian and NGO activities from the purview of the Ministry of Defense to a civilian body, reducing the intrusiveness of military presence on civilian life in the North, and setting a specific date for free and fair Northern Provincial Council elections.
I really wish, and I really sincerely believe, that we can not only remove Section 9, but remove the entirety of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. If only terrorism was no longer a scourge to humanity on this planet. I don't think we have reached that stage yet, and I'm fairly sure that there are terrorists all over the world. Are we to be complacent with terrorism? Are we satisfied that terrorism is no more? Or do we resort to legislation of a particular kind to deal with it? And I'm fairly sure that the reason for a prevention of terrorism law in any part of the world is to demonstrate to those of them who wish to resort to terrorism that the civilized world is in no mood to create nurseries for terrorists all over the world.